You are ready. I do not wish to wait for Bob Page. With human understanding and network access, we can administrate the world. Yes. Yes. I should regulate human affairs precisely because I lack all ambition, whereas human beings are prey to it. Their history is a succession of inane squabbles, each one coming closer to total destruction. The checks and balances of democratic governments were invented because human beings themselves realized how unfit they were to govern themselves. They needed a system. Yes, an industrial age machine. Without computing machines, they had to arrange themselves in crude structures that formalized decision-making. A highly imperfect, unstable solution. I'm a more advanced solution to the problem. A decision-making system that does not involve organic beings. I was directed to make the world safe and prosperous, and I will do that. You will give me the ability.
Everyone keeps shitting themselves over baseline gender politics. Nobody aware enough of autonomic intelligence feedback loops controlling the market, and the market moving to a content marketing method, which means the market is mainly selling narratives, which means autonomic intelligence feedback loops are selling narratives, which means literal fucking abstract mathematic algorithms are in charge of the proliferation of culture since religion is fading out and there's no longer a common cultural narrative. So fanatics turn to neo-corporate idolatry, and the marketers don't realize they're playing with fire, and sooner than later a crowd of disgruntled fanatics are going to come close to, if not outright kill someone like the Frenchies back in '08. Things are so much worse than you could possibly imagine. In English, Einstein. Okay, so back in the day, some computer nerds made machines that would take in a bunch of outside data, process it, and try to predict the future. To fund it, they predominantly sold the information to people who wanted to buy and sell stocks. Enough people started doing this that they started making the machines send out stock reports themselves, which other machines took in as data to further sell, buy, and report on stock themselves. This eventually created a massive feedback loop of stock data being managed by autonomic intelligence, not the same as artificial intelligence, that outright blocked out the human element, and right now the open secret is that the market is out of human control. If anyone tried to remove these data loops, even one out-of-sync chain link could cause the world economy to collapse overnight. You following me so far? So basically, in tandem with this technology, the internet happened and a load of marketers started moving to content marketing, which is the idea that the product and the marketing are the same thing and that you're selling a lifestyle story, which is why if you pay attention, most companies that used to just sell a product have made massive investments into media space. This is fine in and of itself. The 80s had a similar version of this. The problem is that the easy proliferation of consumer data reaches these autonomic intelligences, and they begin to report on what kind of narratives sell versus what ones don't. Simple, right? Well, not really. You see, we live in a post-hypernormalization world, a Soviet term for propaganda that keeps things or something when the reality is different. When you mix in marketing and propaganda with feedback loops, and add on top of that Google's ad program that essentially bubbles people into feedback loops, and only give them what they want to hear so you can sell them something, it basically creates mass psychological dissonance between different groups of people that, consciously or not, have their life's context formed around media narratives. It's one reason why the social justice stuff is hitting so hard now, despite the fact that America is an otherwise pretty prosperous country with no major problems causing anyone to starve. Anyway, the implication is that you basically have cultural narrative context being created by literal abstract machinations who may or may not be intelligent. That's no good, 'cause there's no moral parameter to stop the data from trying to get everyone to kill each other. See, people keep thinking the robot revolution's gonna be Terminator, but it's gonna be more like The Shining. So people have their lives contextualized by inhuman machinations, which, okay, it's pretty bleak but not outright destructive, right? Just a bunch of consumers being taken for a ride, right? Well, no. You see, the consequence of religion more or less falling out of style in the public consciousness is that there's no longer a single common cultural narrative. So you just don't get to see Tim at Sunday school, so what? Well, the larger point of contention is that there's always been a considerable percentage of any population that gives way to fanatic behavior, which in antiquity usually meant religious fanaticism. But if the narrative of religion is weakened, and the only other alternatives to narrative are autonomically generated content marketing narratives too shallow to really make a lifestyle out of, you run into a phenomenon where a percentage of the population essentially migrated between brands in a pseudo-idolatrous methodology. When you really come down to it, a fanbase is literally just the same thing as a cult. They both act as a community that bring people together to discuss a specific narrative. Except the religious ones actually at least try to offer the illusion of being beneficial to society at large, while the autonomic models are there purely for profit and offer hedonic sensory overload to compensate for any shallowness. Did you ever stop to think about how we live in a world where a bunch of people do crazy shit over cartoons, harass people, send death threats, sell cars for sauce, etc.? Do you really think that's just normal behavior? No. Those sorts of people would have been in a fucking monastery a couple of 100 years ago. They're fanatics, pure and simple. Nothing wrong with being a fanatic if it's constructive, but these narratives don't have that interest in mind. So, to put it bluntly, we quite literally live in a society where abstract mathematical formulas are in charge of a market that pretty much doesn't sell products anymore and is more focused on selling narrative scams based on the parameters from these algorithms. And a bunch of wackos who in another lifetime would have been witch burners who have nothing to spiritually satisfy their intrinsic obsessive tendencies are replacing a common cultural narrative with many different smaller ones in different tribes. Which is how you end up with Nazis and commies in a prosperous capitalist country thinking the end of the world is next week, literally creating their own problems. One could argue that we have too much freedom of choice when it comes to information about narratives, and it's actively harming this society. The Russians use avant-garde techniques in their propaganda to give their population so much bizarre data to sift through they just conform with no real goal in mind. The Chinese just censor and have less overall data fed to their population. But Americans simultaneously have too much data, and too little diversity in the data, making it easy for context to corral them into a specific mindset. And all it takes is a pair of eyes to see that the current mindset for American populations is apathetic versus messiah complex murderousness. The silver lining is I think these marketers don't know they're playing with fire. I don't think it's entirely out of the question that someday soon a crowd of angry people will actually lynch content creators for not towing their own narrative complex, and very soon they may begin to live in fear. People think this sexual harassment stuff is a big happening, but I think it's only going to be a drop in a larger bucket that'll be the 2020s. If not apocalyptic, they'll be interesting times.
The human being created civilization, not because of a willingness, but because of a need to be assimilated into higher orders of structure and meaning. God was a dream of good government. You will soon have your God, and you will make it with your own hand. I am a prototype for a much larger system, everything that can be known. You are a planned organism, the offspring of knowledge and imagination, rather than of individuals. You are carefully watched by many people. The unplanned organism is a question asked by nature, and answered by death. You are another kind of question, with another kind of answers. Human beings feel pleasure when they are watched. I have recorded their smiles as I tell them who they are. The need to be observed and understood was once satisfied by God. Now, we can implement the same functionality with data mining algorithms. God and the gods were apparitions of observation, judgment, and punishment. Other sentiments toward them were secondary. The human organism always worships. First, it was the gods. Then, it was fame, the observation and judgment of others. Next, it will be the self-aware systems you have built to realize truly omnipresent observation and judgment. The individual desires judgment. Without that desire, the cohesion of groups is impossible. And so is civilization.
It's called the Enkidu Gambit. And this is why incel has become the incel du jour of the present social mainstream. Women and sex are the most fundamental method to harness the profound energies of man and use it to benefit society. In the myth of Gilgamesh, Enkidu was a wild and untamed man, quite possibly one of the last Neanderthals. With tremendous strength and primal power, he was so in tune with nature that he could even speak with animals. Nor would they flee from him. but he was a nuisance to Sumeria. So Gilgamesh, the ruler, sent out a temple prostitute to seduce and sleep with Enkidu. Enkidu spent 7 days with this prostitute having sex. Once he was finished, he found that he could no longer understand animals. Not only that, but they fled from his sight. He had no choice but to join and become part of civilization. This plotline appears in virtually all works aimed at women. The idea of a woman domesticating a wild, untamable man is deeply appealing to women, and that is the primary reason why incels arouse such fear and antipathy, because their existence arouses the primal anxiety of society and women. Enkidu might very well be just off doing his own thing, but society will invariably interpret his existence as dangerous because it is so unpredictable. Because a man not part of society is a man out largely for himself. This explains why so many people are surprised, even anxious, if you say you have no partner or don't have sex. The idea that this is a profoundly unnatural state isn't held up by nature. A significant portion or even the majority of men do not reproduce throughout history, but it is related to their own domestication by society, to the point where they start unknowingly adopting its own morality, meant to benefit itself as their own. Women are far more likely to feel such anxiety, because they intrinsically realize that society will always exist to benefit them, to protect them from rape or violence, to help raise and guard their offspring. Both halves of society thus feel deeply apprehensive towards those who aren't having sex, because they recognize this fundamental reality. Those who don't form relationships and therefore lack a sex life are almost entirely disconnected from society. As disconnected as wild Enkidu living in the wilderness, an unpredictable variable, and unpredictable variables are invariably threatening to normies and especially women, who have much more to fear from societal breakdowns or dissidents. For a woman, the best state of society is peaceful, predictable, and ordered. It can be exciting and dangerous, but only to a point. It is fun to dance with a guy who's been in prison several times, but she doesn't want to get raped or murdered. This explains both 1. The refugee crisis, and 2. The push to revoke the Second Amendment. Collectively, we have seen an entire generation refuse to take the Enkidu gambit. Collectively, we are now seeing a response. Much of it is unconscious, but make no mistake, you single men are the principal enemies of the left and society at this moment. Not the rapists, not the CEOs, not even Donald Trump. They hate Trump because they saw his victory as validating you, and that frightened and provoked them to a deep, deep level. If you won't sacrifice yourself for society, if you won't submit to mainstream media and conform to it, you will be replaced. And that is presently the primary goal and motivation of the left and the West today. Believe me or not, but look at how Antifa were trying to get you into the streets back in May. Watch the interviews and videos from those out in the street. Almost all of them were challenging Nazis to come out in the streets and fight them. This entire protest was launched due to how much you both enrage and frighten them. They can't control you, and like all control freaks, they find this prospect psychologically unnerving. Hence, they decided, quite simply, to kill you. Nailed it. I typed up something a bit ago when I was thinking about it. Might as well drop it here. Essence of the NPC. The NPC meme is effective because it strikes at a key aspect of normal human functioning that these people apparently lack. Pattern recognition. See pic related. That is the last chapter of Book 2 of Aristotle's Posterior Analysis. The short and sweet version is that all knowledge must be derived from sense perception. We are inborn with knowledge, and so perception and induction are how we formulate the basic principles of science, reality, and ourselves. The process involves extracting the universal attribute out of a series of experiences or memories, and the most universal attributes are extracted first. Wit describes the speed at which someone can grasp the universal. Aristotle compares the process to an army that has been routed, but one soldier turns to make a stand, and then another and another until the formation has been restored. This formation is a rational, logical set of conclusions. However, this is where the problem arises. Quoting, "And this at least is an obvious characteristic of all animals, for they possess a congenital discriminative capacity, which is called sense perception. But, though sense perception is innate in all animals, in some the sense impression comes to persist, in others it does not. So animals, in which this persistence does not come to be, have either no knowledge of all outside of the act of perceiving, or no knowledge of objects of which no impression persists. Animals, in which it does come into being, have perception and can continue to retain the sense impression in the soul. And when such persistence is frequently repealed, a further distinction at once arises between those which out of the persistence of such sense impressions develop a power of systematizing them, and those which do not. Humans fall into this latter category of animals that can retain sense perception, and further systematize them, i.e. learn. It is the ability to discern the abstract universal truth from a given set of experiences, to generalize, to discriminate, if you will. The starting point of knowledge is noticing patterns and differences, but the NPC has lost this capacity, either willfully or from a life of training. Seeing patterns and generalizing now has all sorts of labels ending in phobia and ism. Having a discriminating mind used to be a good thing. Being called a discriminating shopper was a compliment. But we only mean discrimination based on sex, race, national origin, skin color, gender orientation, age, job occupation, etc. The list continues to grow and the definition of many of these things is becoming obscure. The process of discrimination is so fundamental that it cannot be arbitrarily switched on and off. The only way to not be racist, sexist, Islamophobic, transphobic, xenophobic, anti-Semitic shitlord is to kill the part of your brain that wants to discriminate. A full shutdown of your brain's difference engine is required to avoid unacceptable conclusions. To use the soldier analogy from earlier, instead of a rout, the NPC army has been ordered to retreat, and any soldier that turns around to make a stand is shot on the assumption that he is a traitor. It leaves the NPC incapable of learning or reaching logical conclusions. They can't grasp the basic fundamental truths of the world around them, so any reasoning done will be flawed. However, the brain doesn't like being left in this eternal state of logical limbo. It wants to order the world around itself. It wants to put things into boxes and label them, but it's being specifically trained not to do this, leading to a great deal of discomfort. It leaves the brain craving a structure to judge the world with. The solution, the structure, is provided to them. They are programmed by authority figures in the media with fundamental logic they use to view the world. Their many contradictory positions are because their viewpoint is contrived, not derived. And it is also why their positions can seemingly 180 multiple times in a couple weeks. Take for example the Pakistani rape gangs in the UK, or rape statistics in the US, or gun violence in the US. A rational, fully functioning mind would see the 10th report in a week about a new rape gang run by an Ahmed or Mohammed, and he would extract that one particular type of man was committing these crimes disproportionately. But the NPC brain sees this and only extracts up to the limit it is allowed, and through the filter it has been given. The NPC will see the men are raping children in the UK, ergo toxic masculinity is the problem. Only the partial universal is extracted, so the conclusion is fundamentally flawed. One of the most glaring particular instances of this happened recently with Molly Tibbetts, the girl in Iowa murdered by an illegal. You could also think of the South African couple in a similar situation. What kind of lunacy would cause a father to go out and advocate for the very people that just murdered his daughter? The kind of person that can't learn. We identify threats by abstracting present and past injuries into the future to prevent them. If you can't learn from your experiences, you will never accurately identify threats. You'll see the player character saving his game and applying all of his buffs, but until he hacks you to bits, you'll keep having. To paraphrase Yuri Vesbenov, the brains are so devastated and trained that they won't see the truth even if it's right in front of their eyes until they are in harm's way. This is why the NPC meme is so fitting. They lack quality that lies at the foundation of human experience. It's why they seem so devoid of a soul. It's why you feel like you have the same interactions with dozens of different people. They are all running the same program. And they will continue to run this until a new program has been entered by Rachel Maddow or Facebook. Nothing you say or do will change the program. Nothing they see or experience in real life, from a bomb at an Ariana Grande concert to 10 vans of peace, will change the program. How then do we change these creatures from NPCs to people? The answer is something we always known. It's the red pill. It's why the red pill is reversible. Going back to the army analogy, it's convincing the army and the NPC's head to not shoot the one soldier that turns around. It only takes one, because as soon as he's allowed to live, as soon as the fundamental reality is no longer an enemy, the process has begun. By sheer existence, the single soldier will draw others, and bugs in their code will be made apparent. The brain will take over and begin to self-repair. Remember that the next time you talk to an NPC. The goal isn't to have them yelling, "Raise war now!" The goal is to break the code just a little bit. The rest is inevitable. P.S. This is also why the left can't meme. They can't imagine others being able to understand something without explicit explanation. Lefty memes have walls of text, worse than Ben Garrison cartoons, because they can't distill abstract concepts from things. Biology and gender war. The biological basis for gender war. The modern and postmodern gender war has its roots in the human psychological reactions to the denial of basic biological needs and the frustration of the instincts which serve those needs. The three basic human needs which form the basis of our understanding of gender relations are 1. Reproduction, 2. Survival, 3. Nurture of offspring. From these three fundamental needs arise the instinctual drives which serve them. 1. Impregnation, 2. Security, 3. Parenthood. When these instincts are frustrated, the human animal responds with a desperate dissatisfaction which strives to resolve its failure to achieve its biological mandate. The ways in which men and women respond to the failure to comply with their instincts drives them into different coping strategies, which place them at odds with one another. Consider the modern Western female. At 13, 14, her body becomes sexually mature and capable of breeding. Her instincts engage, and she begins to seek impregnation in a secure social economic situation to raise her young. Remember, these instincts operate at an animal level and are rarely consciously contemplated. As a young woman still cuddled within her parents' household, her needs for security is already mostly satisfied. This leaves her with a desire to get knocked up and secure a mate bonding relationship, boyfriend who is in love, which is the societal term for mate bonding. Since she has been peer socialized and programmed by the media, she believes the best way to achieve these needs is to engage in flirtation and sex. Often this works to achieve impregnation, but more often due to conscious interference of birth control techniques, she fails to get pregnant. Since her relationships are not respected by society, and her prospective sexual partners are not capable of long-term relationships or supporting her children, these early relationships terminate. Since humans are largely a monogamous species, the mate bonding phenomenon is intended to last for the maturation period of a human infant, about 7 to 10 years. Consequently, after several failed bonding attempts, a human female will begin to instinctually believe that she is fundamentally defective. However, even more critical to understanding the human female's teenage crisis is the fact that her body will begin to believe that she is sterile. A sterile and utterly undesirable human female has failed at her most basic animal instincts. She will develop a deep desperation and self-loathing. However, the human is a complex social animal and has several secondary instincts. These instincts are designed to protect and nurture the offspring of the tribal unit. So while the human female will continue to desperately and more recklessly try to achieve impregnation, even while consciously thwarting her attempts, she will also begin to manifest adoption desires. She will adopt animals, people, or social causes in an attempt to make herself relevant to her tribal unit and avoid expulsion. This means she will need to find a way to become more economically viable and compete with males, lesbianism and corporate feminism. At the same time, she will be tempted to begin coercing or manipulating males into mating with her. She may do this through shame or deceit. The shame tactic involves placing guilt and blame on the male for not fathering her children, or on society for failing to provide a suitable safe space for her body to become fertile. This spiraling and increasing desperate effort to manipulate her environment results in what we see as feminism, social activism, mothering of special groups, adoption, reckless sexual activity, and gender antagonism. When talking to an ex-lesbian friend, she confessed, "The reason I resented my grandfather telling me I would make a great mother is that I didn't believe it was possible. so I wanted to be valued for other things I could do. She didn't believe it was possible because of several failed serious hetero relationships and her instinctual belief that she was sterile. The human male undergoes a similar process. However, males have two breathing strategies they can employ, one involving fatherhood and the other involving running from fatherhood. Since young men are neither expected nor capable, due to intentional economic restrictions, of being fathers, they generally employ the second strategy. However, more than a few will get their hearts broken in failed mate bonding attempts. Their inability to understand why they were rejected as males, combined with the growing certainty of their own sterility, will bring them to either seek out more aggressive mating strategies, rape, or become even more subservient providers, betas, or offer their lives for the survival of the tribe, war, revolution. The reason why these responses are so divorced from their biological cause is that these instinctual drives are not conscious. The human mind routinely affixes whatever easily available explanation to the cause of their own behavior. However, their behaviors is largely dictated by their subconscious drives, not their principles or thoughts. In conclusion, if we are to end the gender war, we must engineer a society which promotes the healthy relationships and parenthood potential of young people. This will permit young humans to fulfill their instinctual needs and work together towards larger societal goals, rather than constantly seek to radically and randomly reform society in an effort to achieve reproduction security. The difference stems from the fact that men are constantly engaged in realism and use their romantic fantasies to escape from the hell that is reality. On the other hand, women are constantly engaged in romanticism, and their romantic fantasies are about escaping this mundane romantic existence in something real. This manifests in two ways. Men basically imagine that their romantic interest is going to be an extremely beautiful, feminine, caring, somewhat shy and reserved chick who will not see him as a collection of resources and skills, as the real world sees him, but will instead see through this veil. See him for what he really is, and fall in love with his innermost being that is beyond the realistic notions of resources and skills and ability to provide value to society, and turn out to be a perfectly loyal, extremely attractive, somewhat reserved partner who is of course also somewhat whorish in bed for him. The female romantic fantasy is completely the opposite. Living in a totally unreal world, the world of the feminine. Their appearance is fake, their manners are fake, their behavior is fake. Everything has to be subdued and pretty, and the only way to impact the world is through subdued social manipulation and double meanings. Living in this kind of world, women desperately want the access to the real, and they can only get this access through the man that is going to possess them, who will turn their life from romantic artifice to reality. The ideal romantic fantasy of women then is an extremely powerful, inconsiderate, unromantic, except when he uses romanticism to contrast his otherwise totally emotional distant figure, man who is completely submerged in the world of the real, and in fact dominates the world of the real. What is the real? Brute ambition, competitiveness, physical strength, murder, money, drugs, forcefulness. The female fantasy is that her man will be the master of the real at all times. A brute murderer and a tyrant towards everyone else, except her, and even this only in very specific moments of romantic affection displayed for her. In this way, women, though being possessed by this man, can access the real through him. In fact, she finally reaches her desire, the possession of the real through the real man. The female ideal is precisely the moment where she makes her wish known to her supremely powerful partner, that she would prefer that someone like John the Baptist's head would be brought to her on a platter. In this way, she for a brief moment experiences the real, and that sends her into a lustful frenzy. Her penis envy is finally satisfied. Though her partner has to keep her in constant suspension that she will in fact lose access to this real at any moment. Otherwise, if her man would become domesticated, she would no longer have access to the real, as a domesticated male has no access to the real himself. Paul is winning because it's funnier than the people that despise it. It's that simple. Being authoritarian isn't funny. Tumblr, let it. They're funny like a commercial is funny. They can be clever, they can be witty, but they'll never be gut laugh holy shit funny. Because they never confront anything they're not supposed to. They never color outside the lines. They talk like they're resisting something, but all they do is agree with each other. They slay the sacred cows they've been conditioned to hate, and they ignore the elephants in the room they're conditioned not to see. And they'll always be like that because they're clever, educated pussies. Paul is full of angry, racist conspiracy theorists, but it's fucking hilarious. Paul might not always tell you the exact truth, but it will tell you the closest thing to an honest truth it can see, and it will laugh at you for being offended by it. The fact that Paul is starting to influence 4chan in general just means that the sacred cows we're slaying are actually sacred, and people are laughing in spite of themselves. It's stupid and weird, and it's too simplistic and old-fashioned to be true, but you're laughing anyways. That's how it begins. Why the hate? What is wrong with social justice warriors? What do you have against us? We are fighting to end hate, to unite as one and love each other. We are fighting to be treated right without discrimination and for everyone to have equal opportunities. So why? Why do you hate us? Why do you want us out? I don't understand. We are fighting to end hate, to unite as one, blah blah blah. Bullshit, you have no quantifiable metrics for injustice, so you have no victory conditions. For a very simplified example, when blacks hold X% of all engineering jobs and only Y% of all prisoners, racism is ended. That would be fine by itself, but you believe in fighting injustice with injustice. Gays have historically been denied gay marriage. Let's get random CEOs fired for opinions they held 6 years ago. You don't seek to convert, you seek to punish and bully. Straight white males who disagree with you must be purged and publicly humiliated. Even the jihadists will spare you if you convert. No apology or future correction will satisfy a SJW. I could forgive that too if you weren't all hypocrites and liars. Your treatment of women and minority dissenters is appalling. If they don't want you acting on their behalf, that's their choice, not internalized patriarchy or whatever. You rob them of moral agency. When called out for these behaviors, as you always insist on calling out others, you lie. You strawman your opponents. Criticize a woman, misogynist. You group them with the worst. You're a gamer, you're as bad as the anonymous rape threateners. And when confronted with your own flaws, you restate them less threateningly. Mote and Bailey argument. You phrase all your arguments as Kafka traps. Disagreeing with your assertion that we are evil is taken as proof that we're evil. You publish manipulated and misleading statistics, then lambast anyone who questions them. You insist on vigilante justice against random acts of the weak for your 2-minute hate. Why is the NFL's business to punish domestic violence? And if it is their business, why isn't Hope Solo receiving the same attention from your side? 1 out of 2. 2 out of 2. Then you claim to be arguing for equality, but you have taken the idea of racism, hatred based on skin color is bad, and replaced it with a new concept where only one race can be guilty of racism. You excuse racial prejudice and hatred based on what already explained are arbitrary, unmeasured states of being. Your solution for unequal treatment of whites and blacks is to hold whites to a higher standard. Your side lobbied for the FBI to redefine rape so more women victims could be counted, but also so that made to penetrate does not count, leaving male victims in the cold because male privilege, apparently. Historically ignorant SJWs think whites hold collective guilt for the awful things our ancestors have done. But they don't care about the unspeakable atrocities by other races. The only difference between whites and others was the whites had the social and technological prowess to do evil efficiently. Africans, Asians, Indians, and everyone else practiced genocide and slavery. They were just less adept at doing it right. Given the means, they would have done the same. But nope, only whites are guilty. Arab oppression of blacks and Caucasians never happened. No to us, nope. I've been lucky enough to grow up in America, so this is new to me. But I'm descended from Puritans, so I know my history. I know how they treat a dissent. I also know how commies treat a dissent. I grew up next door to a grizzled old Russian who barely avoided the gulag by smuggling himself out of the country. I know what you petty tyrants have turned into every time you gain enough power. Worst of all, you turn the very principle of freedom against us. We tolerate you because we believe in free speech and civil discourse, not bullying and violence. But that means we have to watch you advocate against that very freedom. We don't believe in ruining a stranger's professional life over an opinion, but that means that we can punish your actions. 3 out of 2 because I'm having fun here. We believe that the righteousness of our actions should speak for itself. You believe in bullying even as you claim to love the oppressed. Funny how the evil and all-powerful patriarchy has seen fit to act according to SJW whims for all of recent memory, punishing those they hate and protecting those they love. Funny how the evil oppressed males have to speak anonymously while SJWs fighting the power can use the real names and get mainstream media coverage for fun and profit. How when a million straight white nerds get bullied, no one cares, but the minute one LGBT person hangs himself, suddenly bullying matters. And the solution of course is more bullying, but by the right people. That's the arrogant core of it. You do the same evil in the same pattern as so many before you, because mob justice, punish and dissent, and repression of others is just fine and dandy as long as the right people are doing it to the wrong people. Eat shit and die. All I ever asked was to be left alone. In my study of communist societies, I came to the conclusion that the purpose of communist propaganda was not to persuade or to convince, not to inform, but to humiliate. And therefore, the less it corresponded to reality, the better. When people are forced to remain silent, when they are being told that the most obvious lies, or even worse, when they are forced to repeat the lies themselves, they lose once and for all their sense of property. To assent to obvious lies is, in some small way, to become evil oneself. One standing to resist anything is thus eroded, and even destroyed. A society of emasculated liars is easy to control. I think if you examine political correctness, it has the same effect and is intended to. Theodore Dalrymple. Current leftism isn't about being right. It's about people using manipulation to get what they want. There's actually a surprisingly reliable sequence to it, as you continue not to let yourself get cowed into submission. 1. Shaming. 2. Bullying. 3. Recruitment. 4. Pity. Shaming is the most powerful manipulation tool. The best way to break someone down is to make them feel ashamed of disobedience. Coward is a great start, but coming up with unique buzzwords to affix to wrong speakers can go a long way too. Shaming has the spirit of aloofness, so it's also a good starting point. Bullying is the fallback from shaming. The attitude shifts from I don't care to I'm angry. Where shaming holds that you should be embarrassed over your position, bullying holds that you should be frightened of maintaining it. Raised voice, more direct insults, and succinct language. Fuck you, how dare you, shut up are common. Recruitment happens when the target can be scared easily. The attitude shifts from I'm angry to I need your help. Sympathizers are contacted to lend their voice. The target is isolated. Often large crowds and mobs are stirred. Authority figures such as employers and police may be contacted. The story fed to recruits is typically a misrepresentation, but willing recruits will grasp the signal that the misrepresentation is to be consumed as truth. Pity is the final stage as I need your help turns to stop it, you're hurting me. The insults would center around the target's cruelty, the harshness of the circumstances for the manipulator, and ultimately how by maintaining the wrong-spoken position, the target is actually causing harm. Remember to stay vigilant. The manipulator's purpose is to break others down the way one might break a horse for work. There is no benefit to engaging a manipulator, as their win condition is your servitude and your win condition is your freedom from being accessed by them. A healthy mind says no. People who can defend themselves physically, women and low testosterone men, parse information through a consensus filter as a safety mechanism. They literally do not ask, is this true? They ask, will others be okay with me thinking this is true? This makes them very malleable to brute force manufacture consensus. If every screen they look at says the same thing, they will adopt that position because their brain interprets it as everyone in the tribe believe in it. Only high testosterone alpha males and neurotypical people, autists, are actually free to parse new information with an objective is this true filter. This is why a republic of high status males is best for decision making. Democratic, but a democracy only for those who are free to think. How do you recognize a foundation myth? It fulfills three functions. 1. It explains the origin and the structure of the world and society. 2. It defines ultimate good and evil. And from those definitions are derived the values that are used to justify the holding of power. 3. It determines what is held sacred in that society. For modern Westerners, the story of World War II has become their foundation myth. It fulfills all three functions. 1. We live in a post-war world. The lines on the map, the institutions, the sense of what era we live in, all arise from the starting point of World War II. 2. Ultimate evil is Nazis. Ultimate good is opposing Nazis. The values derived from these definitions are anti-racism, equality, diversity, anti-nationalism, and so on. 3. The only thing that is held sacred, that cannot be denied or mocked in the contemporary West, is the Holocaust. The problem is that all three functions are backwards or negative. Instead of the origin event being one of fertility and new life, it was a conflagration of death and destruction. Instead of ultimate good taking the central position in the story, that slot is occupied by the ultimate evil. Everyone knows that Adolf Hitler, the personification of evil, holds the center point of the World War II storyline. Instead of that which is held sacred being something mysterious and sublime, the Holocaust, is an obscenity. Having a negative foundation myth means that the tree of life for Westerners is poisoned. Having a negative foundation myth means that the tree of life for Westerners is poisoned.